Hi everyone, welcome to the IM Tech Meetup, and we can go ahead and get started. So this is the IM Tech Meetup, sponsored by Kontent.ai and Headstack. And this time around, we're going to be talking about Astro. Got awesome speakers about the topic, and super excited about this particular one as well. So let's get started. So before we get started, I'm just going to talk a little bit here and say, who am I? My name's Ilesh Mistry. I'm a senior front-end engineer and a Kontent.ai MVP. Should you want to contact me, then you can use the QR code on the right-hand side. IM Tech Meetups are generally front-end topics, so we try and have them maybe like every couple of months or every month or so. And if you want to know more, just follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter, and you'll get to kind of hear about this a bit more. Similarly, if you want to sort of like speak at a future meetup or know a particular topic or want to recommend some people, or even sponsor the event, then by all means just get in touch. We'll be recording the events as well, so it's on YouTube as well. A little bit about Kontent.ai. They're basically a headless CMS that enables organizations to govern all their content. So it's basically, add in the content and then display it how you want. And hopefully Astro is one way of doing it as well, which we will hear about later. You can use their QR codes on the right-hand side to kind of look into them a bit more in more detail. They are recruiting. So, if you're looking to switch careers, then get in touch with them. The other sponsors are Headstack. They're up and coming, and basically the idea is that they want to host and show all the tech meetups around, and really have one platform to kind of do it all on without too much registration and too many fees and things like that as well. So check them out as well. Just a few things. So, during the sessions, obviously add your questions in the chat, and then we can have some extra sessions at the end for question and answering. Recording the event, I already mentioned that, and I'll share the recording pretty much hopefully maybe later on today or even potentially tomorrow on YouTube, so we can kind of catch up with that. And if you need to drop off, that's not a problem. Hopefully you can catch a recording afterwards. Please do share this on social media, so anything like IM Tech Meetup or Ilesh Mistry, that would be great. And throughout the sessions, I'll be kind of dropping in links to potentially win some swag. So this is kind of swag you can probably win. The QR code's there at the moment, but don't worry, I'll send the link around during the sessions anyway. So plenty of time to kind of get that down. So really back to this sort of like set of topics today. So firstly, we're going to have Ayco going to talk about the introduction to Astro. So it's obviously going to be amazing in the sense of, especially people who are new to Astro, that would be awesome to kind of get into. Then we've got Ben, who's going to talk about opt-in design. So he'll be presenting there. Then we've got Richard talking about getting started with Astro and Kontent.ai. So it'll be a different mix to how Astro could be used. And then Elian's going to be talking about sharing the state between multiple components and frameworks. And hopefully we'll get some kind of demos going on as well, which would be awesome. And praying to the demo cards as well. So yeah, let's get started. So I think, Ben, we're going to hand over to you. Just let us know when you're ready, and then I'll stop sharing.
I should be ready to go if y'all can hear me.
Awesome. Yeah, we can. Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah, and I've set up the most jerry-rigged setup. I'm out of town right now, but I have my microphone here, and I set up my phone as a camera, which is a cool thing you can do on Macs now. So I'm hoping I look good. But I've set this up with OBS and stuff. So just full screen my face. I won't be screen sharing anything. I'm just going to run through my favorite slide deck. So let me flip around in these controls here. Screen share. There we go. There's you and there's me. So hey everyone, I'm Ben Holmes, a core maintainer over at Astro. And I wanted to hop in here to talk about a design trend that I've noticed in how frameworks are built that Astro definitely buys into, opt-in design, which I've dubbed a new era in web development. So first off, this is not a UI design talk, although graphic design is my passion, clearly by this font choice. And it's not a systems design talk. We're not talking about like infrastructure or microservices or diagramming, any of that. We're here to talk about API design. So learning what good defaults mean when you're designing even just components in your own company's applications or in the libraries that you choose to use. And using this knowledge, understanding how to design things better in order to find and build the best tools for everyone. So giving you a good starting point so that you can get off on the right foot and build something that's best for users, putting the users first. So extended introduction. I am unofficially the chief whiteboard officer over at Astro. In other words, I like to explain concepts on a whiteboard. Don't worry, I do have a travel edition right here that I'll do to explain a concept in a moment. But I also have a bunch of YouTube videos explaining 1-minute concepts, especially around Astro. So if you go to wtw.dev, you can learn more if you're so interested. And I'm the champion of content. That's kind of my specialty at Astro. So not really talking like video content, although that's one of them. I like content formats like Markdown, MDX, MarkDoc, headless CMSs, love them all. They're definitely the most important part of your Astro application since we are focused on content sites like blogs, marketing, and docs. So if you've ever played with some of the APIs we have to make your experience a little better over there, I'm the one that has tried to help build it. This is a little bit difficult to do over Zoom, but show of hands, who in the audience has used React.js before? And I'll try to sort of see this. All right, Elian's got 2 hands in the air. Heck yeah. So let me, how do you switch screens? Oh, perfect. So keep your hands in the air if you already raised them. If this has happened to you before, something to this effect. Is anyone raising their hands? Actually, fewer people. Okay. All right. Usually more hands go up than we started with when I present this slide because, I mean, we all know the foot gun. We all know how it is. Also, hands in the air if you've ever Googled this before. Do we need to use memo? Have you bookmarked Kent C. Dodds' blog post about all that stuff? Elian showing his support here. We got nods. I'll definitely take nods on that one. These are kind of par for the course when you're using React. And that's based on kind of the principle that they designed with, which is re-rendering by default, which in their view is a way to make things consistent. So whatever code you write in a component is going to consistently reflect the UI that's showing to the user. But of course, that has the consequence where you want to re-render everything. So it's easy to start where you can just define variables and expect everything to rerun, but it gets harder to maintain as you go. It's not really sort of a pit of success. So in this example here, I have a shopping cart set up. We have, our quantity stored as a state variable, storing however many things are in the cart. And then you might want to calculate something based on that quantity, like price. And in React, if you ever want to have one variable update in line with another, we just create a new variable. There's no such thing as computed properties or arrow functions. You just say this variable is yielded from this one. So when you go through the flow of what happens, if you input some text, that's going to set the quantity value, beams that up here. It reruns your whole function top to bottom because some state needs to be reevaluated, which means calculate price is going to rerun again and everything else in the component. And then it's going to re-render the cart and the text input. And of course, you've got virtual DOMs in order to diff the changes and only apply what the user needs to see. But it is still processing all of that stuff. And this gets a bit more complex when you start hoisting things to providers. A common practice in React is using context in order to hoist up commonly shared variables. So you might have some more components in your app that care about quantity. For example, you might create a quantity provider in case product images needs to re-render something based on that quantity. And you might elevate that a little bit higher to a cart provider. So now your navigation bar also cares about it. Maybe you have a cart flyout that needs to come in from the side. And that has to have a little charm that shows you how much quantity is in there. So now you've hoisted your quantity up here and you're at risk of re-rendering everything top to bottom inside of this cart sandwich. And it does get worse from there. If you go full on provider, you put it in your global context, maybe you're not using Redux and you are setting a global React context. Well, everything from the cart flyout to the footer and legal text is at risk of re-rendering, or at least recomputing changes, which, you know, kind of a footnote if you don't know what you're doing, if you haven't learned about React's internals. So I kind of call this MMO state, MMO problems, where, you know, if you have a more complex component that has additional state that doesn't rely on changes, then it gets a little bit more hairy. So, you know, in our old example, we had quantity and price calculated from quantity, but you might also have product images and shipping text. These are fetching from some remote CMS in order to show that content, but it doesn't care about quantity. But even so, if you don't write things with proper use effects, it's going to rerun this fetch call every time quantity changes. And if it's not re-rendering anything, you might not even know until the performance audit comes in. So that sort of drives you to defensively add use memo wrappers around everything in your app, adding the dependency array, which I irresponsibly didn't here, but you'll need one, in order to ensure that you only rerun certain bits of logic when the state it cares about is re-rendering. So that's where you run into, like, should I use memo everything? We have a whole memo provider in React now just to get around this issue. It's a lot for the user to think about. And it's often why the advice is, you know, just don't even use memo if you don't have a problem yet. Just wait for the problems to crop up, and then you can start using all of those defensive use memos. And this is an example of what I would call opt-out design, if you want to classify it around our principle. It assumes a goal, which is, you know, to lower developer friction. In this case, make it consistent in order to get you to your goal. So you want to have some state logic that re-renders UI. In order to get you there cleanly, it's just going to re-render state, and it's going to do it internally, and you have to understand how it's working when things come along later. So you're hiding complexity at first in order to get things shipped in a predictable way, and you deal with the complexity monster later if it comes in. So I'm going to try to sort of diagram that to have a little takeaway here. I'm sorry I have to show you the infinite view in order to switch off. I don't have a stream deck, which I know is what the cool people use. But, you know, we've got our little whiteboard here to sort of show you what you're talking about. And let me mess with my camera settings just to make sure it's in frame. That's in frame. Perfect. So, you know, when you're creating a product roadmap, I like to think of it as sort of a straight line from the start of your project to, you know, some point when the performance audit comes in. So you have your start and you have your audit, which is, in other words, you know, you have your high traffic and you want to get to a more performant state in order to bring in more users, maybe fix some slow checkout problems on your e-commerce site. And when you start off, you kind of start with like an infinite tool chest of everything that you could need. And I'm going to do my best to draw a little tool chest here. I'm sorry you can't see me while I do this. But, you know, you start with your tool chest of all of the libraries that you need. A common one might be, you know, React router in order to re-render certain bits of state. You might have Redux thrown in there. You might have Next.js in order to make everything cleaner. So you don't even need router at that point. So, you know, you just throw everything in the tool chest in case you need it later. But that also means that you're going to bundle everything to the user, and you might send unnecessary JavaScript and unnecessary complexity that sort of gets you there faster. So I describe that approach as, you know, being pretty linear. You have low complexity. So I would call this sort of a low complexity curve. Complexity. So you start out pretty low. And then when you get to the audit, then you look through how many performance foot guns did we fall into? What is sort of the problem there? And, you know, that ends up sort of at kind of the worst state that you could be in, you know, where you sort of have, you remember the dog meme where he says everything is fine while the world is burning around him? That's kind of how I imagine the audit when it comes in. It's the developer's worst nightmare. It's not really what you're trying to do. So my goal in, you know, sort of flipping the script is to sort of audit how your toolbox starts off. And this is getting into our Astro mindset a bit, where instead of having a toolbox that loads every React library and dependency that you need, you just start with a single dependency. So you might just start with Astro. And as you go, you start with a fairly low complexity of an application. But as you run into problems like, ooh, this cart needs to be interactive, and we want to use a design system in order to get us there. Well, that's when you start adding a little bit of complexity to your app as you go along. So for example, you might hit that interactivity problem and you run Astro and React along your developer journey. So I'll draw a little bit of flames here, a little bit of friction, because now you're adding more complexity, larger bundle size, but you were very conscious of the JavaScript that you were shipping there. You understood what it meant. And then you might run into a need for SSR. So before you're rendering static assets, then you realize, okay, now we're doing some A/B testing. We need to re-render this on a serverless function, perhaps. That's when you reach for an adapter. So in Astro, that would be AstroAdd for cell for a serverless function, Node if you just want a Node server, any of that stuff. So you're adding complexity as you go. But once you get to the audit, well, you already dealt with that complexity up front. So you knew what you were getting into, and you're probably going to pass, hopefully getting the best Lighthouse scores that you can. Because when it's up to you to opt in to certain complexity, it sort of prompts you to think about what you're adding, to be a little bit more conscious about what am I adding to my application? Do I need to sort of see how the change in Lighthouse score affected things, et cetera, et cetera. So that's really what we're trying to get at, is making developers more conscious of trade-offs as they come in, so that you can only add the necessary complexity for your app. So you don't have that tool chest of everything. You're just adding what you need. So back to the slides. I hope that was helpful in some way. You can screenshot it in the VOD after if you want. So this is already getting at what we can do differently to think about our applications. So I'm actually going to do a comparison on the component side, and then we'll bring it to the meta framework angle. So I like to bring in Solid.js as a comparison to React here. This is to quote Fireship, the second best YouTuber. I'm on the platform, so he's the second best. It's a declarative JavaScript framework for building fast UIs with maximum control over reactivity. They like to call it fine-grained reactivity. And I like this as, the most bare bones example. So here we have a component written in React and a component written in Solid. And you'll notice that they are very, very similar. They both use JSX. They both use state variables. In React, it's called useState. In Solid, it's called createSignal. This is inspired by a pub/sub mindset, but they ended up at the same solution, really. And when we render these out, we're going to get our quantity, price, and also product images and shipping text. So I have two working demos of those components here. And you'll notice on the React side, when we update quantity right here, it's going to also update our price. But you also notice that it is updating our image and it's reloading our shipping text because we didn't have good use effects. We didn't have good practices. So it's just going to rerun everything in the component. It's up to you to add in proper effects and memos to prevent that. And Solid is the split view of this. So in Solid, it's going to update the quantity, but nothing else is going to update, not even the price. And what's going on there? Well, you'll notice I put a little X next to here where I wrote it the same way I did in React, just to understand what I'm working with. And the fix to this problem is to add a little execution function to it. If you've used Vue.js, it's kind of like computed. If you've used Svelte, it's like the $ operator, where you're saying, instead of just calculating the price as a one-off, I want you to rerun this function and just track whatever dependencies are inside of that function. Solid is a very smart compiler that can see that quantity is involved in this calculation. So it's going to rerun this function every time quantity changes. So now that I've done that, we can see our price is updating in line with quantity, and everything else that isn't a function, well, it's just going to stay the same. In fact, I could wrap these in functions if I wanted to. And because it doesn't have any dependencies, like it doesn't rely on quantity, it's just not going to rerun those. Solid is very smart about these things, while React is purposefully naive in order to keep things consistent. So React is going to rerun where state is declared. So rerun your function top to bottom. And Solid's going to rerun where state is used. So it's going to just rerun this little price right here. It's only going to re-render this, and it's only going to reload this whenever quantity changes. So Solid is making it as fine-grained as possible. It's not at the function level. It's at the state level. It's very specific. So let me jump to the next slide. This is part of a new wave of frameworks that are thinking about state differently. Svelte is my other favorite example, where you use this little $ operator in order to say this price should rerun whenever quantity changes. Same dependency tracking as Solid. Vue also has computed, which is very similar to this concept. So this is taking us to the opt-in mindset. And let me describe some of those principles to you. It's how we thought about Astro, and it's how some of the frameworks we support, like Solid and Svelte, think about state management. So the first principle is to find the lowest common denominator. The second is to make complexity easy to add when intended. So make sure the developer knows what they're getting into. And stay user first in the design. Don't make it developer first. Make it easy for developers. That's what number 2 is for. But we're really trying to design something that has the best user experience. So breaking those down a bit. The first principle, find the lowest common denominator. Think about the simplest use case for whatever the framework, library, or component is. An example is, of course, React, where React is able to build kind of any web application. And the simplest case is just rendering HTML onto the page without any state. So try to design an experience that's going to be really good for that minimal denominator. And I would say React server components are a really good example of that. But also thinking about, what really is the lowest common denominator. You don't want a car with opt-in wheels. It has to make sense what you're adding on. And you might need a base bundle of JavaScript in order to address the lowest common denominator. We're not here to say 0.js all the time. You might still need it. The second is to make complexity easy to add when intended. I like to reference a $ operator in Svelte, which is a very clear, I'm opting into re-renders, and I know what this tool does because I've read the docs, I understand the principles. And in Solid, that's also the function. Think about it that way. So don't start with the kitchen sink. Add that complexity along the way so you don't deal with a monster later on. The last one is staying user first. So think about that low complexity baseline and how it usually relates to the user experience. So you often think about performance when you're talking user experience. If you opt into re-rendering your component with that $ operator, then that means fewer CPU cycles, better for low-powered devices or poor cell reception, which means better performance. So it's not always going to be performance. I actually have an example in a moment. But think about how your complexity relates to the end goal. So there's a whole world of examples around this concept. The first one is an interesting one from Dino, where they're bringing opt-in to permissions that your scripts have. And this is something in Node 20 as well, I just learned about. But they require flags to be added to your CLI scripts whenever you run them, if they need access to external things. For example, if you're running a server and it needs access to the network and your file system and being able to access environment variables. I can't remember what run does. I need to go reference the docs. These are flags you need to add explicitly. Otherwise, it'll fail and say, you don't have permission to access the file system. We're not going to run this function for you. That's kind of like the permissions in mobile apps, right? Where you can say, I have permission to read your contacts, and therefore I'm going to do this. But if I don't have permission, I'm going to have a fallback. That's something that Dino is bringing in, and it's addressing all of those core principles we just talked about. The lowest denominator you're thinking about, a simple CLI tool, no I/O, maybe like a text adventure game that doesn't need access to anything else. That's the lowest example, and it serves that really well with low complexity. And then if you need to add complexity, you use flags that are easy to understand for a developer, no accidental foot guns, you know what they do. And it is user first, since we're talking about security here. We want to keep users' devices safe, and we're designing our APIs around that. So the second one, hey, Astro, there we go. This brings opt-in to client-side JavaScript, among other things. But client-side JS is kind of the bread and butter, where it starts from static HTML templating. And when you need interactivity like a like button, you can choose to load JavaScript. Here we're using a client directive to do so, to say only load the JavaScript for this component when it is visible on the page. So if it's off screen and I need to scroll down to it, visible is going to hydrate my component when that condition is met. So this again addresses our principles. The lowest denominator is a static homepage with no JavaScript. Think marketing pages, your personal blog site, anything that just doesn't need interactivity. And it is adding complexity when you need it. So you can't just import a component. You also add the client directive, so you're conscious about what you're shipping, and you can monitor Lighthouse scores, do what you need to do when you are reaching for a component library. And it's user first. We're thinking about those core web vitals. So we want to have that fast initial load. That's why something like client visible is great, because it means above the fold content can load immediately so that users see something. You get that instant Lighthouse score and those click-throughs. And then when you scroll down the page to that JavaScript, then it'll load in everything. So it's going to be good user experience and good metrics for you. So I think I have a little bit of time here to show you a demo. It's not going to take too long, but I'm going to demo it using our CLI, and I'm just going to code live. I normally wouldn't do this, but playing with Copilot recently, it has been such a joy to do live code demos because it just auto-completes everything for me. I'm also going to double check. Yes, I am still screen sharing. Perfect. That would have been disastrous. If I was talking this whole time and you were just screaming at me, I can't see your screen. Man. Okay, so I'm going to create a new Astro app, and I think the command for that is create Astro, and I'll just run it raw, though we do have some flags in order to make it a little bit faster. This will give you your cute little Houston helper that will help you make the web weird. He says a lot of things, that's one of them. And we'll call this one, Meetup Astro demo. There we go. And we'll include some sample files. I think I'm going to use the blog template. You can also create an empty project. You can get some base styles. I'll install dependencies with pnpm, which should be the faster option. If you're looking for a faster install tool, just use pnpm. I'll add TypeScript, and I can use the strict settings, although you can also make it relaxed if you're a JavaScript dev and you just want to ignore types. That's an option too, though Astro ships with TypeScript by default, which is really nice. And I'll create a new Git repository, in case someone needs it. And I'll go ahead and open this with VS Code. So open it recursively in my current window. Meetup Astro demo. There we go. So this gives you a basic project that has a few subdirectories since we are building a blog here. And it gives you a set of Astro components. It gives you some content to render on the page. This is building a feature that's near and dear to my heart, content collections that let you configure all the front matter in your post and type check those appropriately. I'll need to run the sync command to get some type checking in here. And then we have our pages. So this is our home page right here, Hello Astronaut. And I'll start up a dev server so that you can see that. So we should be able to just run pnpm dev that will generate some types for us and start up our dev server. So jumping into that, we got Hello Astronaut, perfect. And I'll split screen this so that we can work with it. Also, shout out to Elian for telling me Command J to show and hide the terminal. I never knew this. I'm kind of embarrassed that I didn't, but there you go. So we've got our blog here, and we have some blog posts. So I can jump in all of these. We're using get static paths for that one. So if I jump into the blog index, we can see that in action. Ooh, I think it's actually a wildcard route. There we go. So if you're familiar with Next.js, we use the same exact get static paths function from the old school pages directory. So if you're on a pages project right now, it might be easier to migrate to Astro than the app directory. Always like doing that little plug since I know some of y'all are Next.js fans. So we've set it up as a basic blog here. We have all of our headings, and by default, this is going to just be an HTML template that is rendered at build time. And if I go into my network, we should see that there is some JavaScript to load styles. This is just because of our dev server here, and our client, which is just Vite. But other than that, there is no client-side JS. So this is, hot module reloading. This is all dev stuff, but rest assured, there is zero JS that is going to load in your production app. So that's pretty cool. Let's say, though, that we need to add some complexity to this blog. For example, a like button that we want to add to the page. Well, I'll go ahead and add React to my application in order to do that. And it is as simple as Astro add, which I alluded to just recently. So Astro add React will add React to this guy, and it will install all the dependencies for you, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to let all of that run. This is also going to update your config for you. There really is zero code to write, and it'll update your TypeScript type so you don't have to look in the docs for how to do that. And it will adapt to any component library you want. There is Astro add solid, Astro add svelte, Astro add view. There's lit element even. All of those are at your fingertips if you want it. You might even want to use solid.js just because it is that simple. In fact, I might go ahead and do that. Would that be crazy for me to use solid.js? I don't think it would be. I'm so used to talking to React-only crowds that I never do it. Let's do that. I'm going to undo this, and I'm going to use solid. How about that? Because if you combine Astro with Solid, you're going to get the best of all worlds, the most efficient component library and the most efficient framework together at last. So that'll update my config for Solid.js instead, different JSX options. And there we go. Now we're ready to use Solid. That easy to choose your framework. So I'm going to start this up again. We should get our same homepage as before. And now I'm going to jump back to our slug, I think. And I'm just going to render a like button on the page. It should probably have context of what the post is, all that stuff, but I'm just going to do it simply here. So I'm going to add a like button in a moment, but actually let me go ahead and create this file for the first time. So in components, I'm going to create a like button.tsx. You can also use JSX. I'm going to use a snippet for that, like button. Come on, like button. And I'm just going to create some component state. So there we go. And it doesn't know what year it is. It's 2023. We're not using React here. We use create signal with some nice autocomplete. I'm going to create a button inside of this. On click, we're going to set liked to its opposite. Let's see if Copilot gives me that. Maybe not. I can write that myself, though. Set liked to the opposite of liked. And that is a very simple way to do it. So I'm going to do some heart emojis because I love adding a little bit of personality to this. I'll do a white heart to sort of mean hollow, and then a regular heart for this. There we go. So now we have our like button. I'm going to export default so we have it. Now I'm going to jump back to this page, and I'm going to just add a like button onto there. And didn't want to autocomplete that, but no worries. Components, like button, and Copilot getting a little frisky there. All right, so now we have a like button on the page. There we go. But you'll notice it is not interactive. That's because by default, we let you use component libraries for templating. If you want to use some client-side JavaScript, you can add a client directive, which our editor tools will tell you about. And I'm going to use client load for this one, which just means loaded as soon as possible. Since the button is above the fold, I don't really want to use visible because it's always visible. So let's just do that. And now something doesn't work. Maybe I've done this wrong. Let me double check here. Let me check. This is what I get for not using the React example that I always use. Let me see here. So on click, set liked. Heck, why doesn't that work actually? Let me see here. Does anyone see what's wrong? Am I a fool? Have I done this wrong? Maybe I have to do this. I can't remember. Yeah, that's what I have to do. Yeah, Solid requires you to call your state variables as functions. I forgot about that one. That's what I get for using, my own brain here. But that will give us a very simple like button that likes and unlikes. And there you go. Now I've opted into just a little bit of JavaScript, only the JavaScript that I need for this page. And the beauty of this is, if I go back to my homepage, there's still 0.js. We didn't rely on Solid for our whole application. We're just using it on the page where we need it. And if you wanted to use it in your whole app, well, you could go up to your layout that is used by all of your blog posts, and you could add it here. But since, we import layouts in only the pages that need that layout, well, we're very efficient about what JS is going to load on the page. So it's as opt-in as you can get. The second thing that I'll go ahead and try is server rendering. I think I'm up on time, but I'll at least show y'all what you can do here. I'm going to set up a basic node server instead, and that will install a node adapter for you and give you some options on how you want to deploy it. You can deploy them both as standalone servers or as middleware on an existing server. So if you have an existing node bucket sitting around on some AWS deploy, you can add Astro to it to serve up the documentation for that endpoint, for example. We have a lot of users that love using the node adapter for those kinds of things. So gotta at least call it out. And we will get an error because we are relying on get static paths right now. So let me show off this cool feature. You can also pre-render pages, which means go back to rendering as HTML. And then for the rest of these, we've got server endpoints. So if I mess around with the homepage, for example, and I say, you know what, I want to pass in, an A/B test variable or something. So A/B test group, and I can, add different layouts, do whatever I need. that can come straight from astro.params. Or actually, I think we want to do astro request params. So let me get a little creative here. New URL, not search params. These are going to be the params. Notice that we're using a web standard URL object. We don't have any special UIs. I heard an unmute. Am I up on time?
No, you're good to go. I'll just find someone to mute. There we go.
Oh, no problem. I'll do that in a moment myself. But this is how you would do search params if you wanted to. So I'm just using the URL object. Astro request is the inbound request on the server endpoint. And A/B test is this variable here. So if I add in, for example, and I'll render it on the page actually, just so we see it. And that's going to be the group. I'm just going to render A/B test on the page, whatever that is. Save that. And now if I add A/B test equals group 1, that will log out group 1. If we go to group 2, that's going to be group 2. So when you move on to server rendering with Astro, it's literally the same game. The only difference is there's no get static paths with server rendering, since it is available to you as an endpoint. As long as you know that one rule, you can keep authoring your Astro app however you wanted to before, and you can use server rendering instead. And you can, get creative with ternaries if you ever need to. So if you say like A/B test equals 1, you can say, hey, group 1, otherwise that. If you're familiar with JSX, we use the exact same stuff. So, you don't have to worry about learning a new syntax either. When you're using Astro, it is the familiar JSX stuff. So that's really everything I wanted to demo. Opt-in server rendering, opt-in client-side JavaScript, helping you add complexity where you need it, so you can audit along the way and make the best choices. So a little wrap up here, just to make sure y'all have a goodie bag to go home with. These are my socials, and these are also the Astro Discord links. We can share this in the MS Teams, of course. Go to astro.build/chat to join our Discord community. We have support. We have a showcase thread to show off all the amazing things people build. So head over there and show some love. You can also find me at bholmesdev. I think my name card's been all over the place, but wtw.dev, whiteboardtheweb.dev. That's where I do all of my videos and such. It's an archive. And the slideshow is going to be on my GitHub. Also, bholmesdev. Happy to share out the links afterwards. But thank you, people. I'm glad to open up for the Astro talks that we're about to do, and I'll leave the floor for all you amazing people. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thanks, Ben. Do you have any questions for Ben? I'll probably ask one then. So you're, normally very proactive with the whiteboards. What's the biggest whiteboard you actually working on?
Do have a bigger one. All right, no questions.
Oh, did you get that question? Sorry. I said, what's the biggest whiteboard you've actually wrote on? Or
what's the? It's not going to be a special answer. There was a sort of smart board when we did our Copenhagen trip. We had an Astro offsite up there, and there was a Google Jamboard, which is just like a big sort of 1080p monitor that you can draw stuff on. It's probably like the most impractical thing for any office, but it was the coolest thing to write on. So that would probably be my answer. But otherwise, it's just like academic whiteboards, stuff in college. That's probably the biggest one. I don't think people go for world's biggest whiteboard. It's not like the world's biggest ball of twine, but I wish there was one. I'd like to go find.
Cool. And then I guess like Astro-wise, obviously it's getting popular and popular. Do you feel like there's any other sort of competitors out there that are quite close or doing something similar? We should be sort of not going and not looking at? I'm joking.
Always evaluate and choose the best tool for the job, but Astro is usually the best tool. There are a few. I always point to Next.js because we're going to be very familiar if you're coming from their pages router. So if you already have a static app on there, I know they have a basic blog example. I definitely like pointing to Astro as like, if you are doing a content site, blogs, docs, e-commerce even, Astro is a cool thing to look at for a lower JS baseline, but familiar APIs. There's also a few others that do the JS Lite approach. For example, SvelteKit is going to be sort of a less JavaScript-y alternative to Astro, although it does use an app router, so it's more geared towards those dynamic route experiences, not so much blogs and docs, but it is the one tool that's kind of close to my heart. I like SvelteKit a lot. So if you want low JS, that's a really good one. And the last one's Quick. I haven't played with this one as much lately, but people love their whole opt-in to JavaScript at the individual component level. It's really granular requests. I know Astro has stronger Markdown API, so if you're working with Markdown, Astro is going to be easier than Quick. But now that they're 1.0, it's something I probably want to evaluate again so I can answer that question better. People love talking about Quick, and I do really like what they're doing with their opt-in JS.
Thanks. I don't want to steal all the questions, but I've got another one on the list. But it's more to do with the fact that with Astro and like complicated, highly complicated websites and applications, like do you know if there's like a limit to where it can go, or how far have you tested this?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's no limit to what you can do with it because it is at its core a way to just template HTML and you can adapt it to any server you want. I've called it an Express replacement, where if you're using Express.js to stand up servers and endpoints, Astro on a node bucket is going to be the same experience with modern APIs. So whatever you can do with a home-built backend server, you could also do with Astro, which means that it is adaptable to things. You can also bring your own SPA router. People have done that before, like mounting React router in Astro to get server rendering benefits. But if you're asking what is it going to be most effective at, I would say Astro has like the special Markdown APIs and the first class docs for headless CMSs, which pushes you towards blogs, docs, e-commerce, marketing, those areas of the spectrum of interactivity. So if you go up to building the next Facebook, it's going to be less charted territory. If you use frameworks like Next, you will have more resources that make you move faster, just more people who have done that path before. So it's why I still recommend frameworks like Next for dynamic apps, just because there's more blog posts and resources out there. But that's not to say Astro can't do it. I love the nerds out there that are exploring those paths. Otterlord, he's in the audience. He's done like auth workflows with Auth.js, which is totally usable in Astro. So those courses are still being plotted out, I think, but it's definitely stuff that I'm curious about.
Thank you. Has anyone got any other questions? No. Thank you, Ben. Great presentation. And next up, we got Ayo, who's going to talk about Astro as well. So over to you. Just let us know when you're ready.
All right. My turn, I guess. Wow, that was a really great opening talk, Ben. So opt-in design, you really see that a lot when you use Astro. And with my talk, it's just gonna be very overview. So it's an introduction. It's geared towards anyone who are not yet very familiar with Astro. So let me just share my screen. Put you here. And yeah, so I think the demo that Ben did is a really great introduction already. So I have an opportunity here to zoom through the demos that I have, which is a good thing because I could maybe adapt here a bit and show you some of the experimental stuff that I'm involved in. But yeah, let's start with this image. I like to start with this one when I give this introduction talk because pictures say a lot of words, they say, and I think also people like to put faces behind the tools they use, which is a good thing. You need to know the people behind it. And for me, that's one of the great things about Astro. I like to focus on this one. This is Fred. He's one of the co-creators, one of those who started Astro JS. And this is the Primigen, I guess, Primigen. He's big on YouTube. He's a Twitch streamer, but basically he wanted to interview Fred about Astro when it was just I think this was last year. Yeah, and so he interviewed Fred there, uh, and basically maybe one important thing that you need to realize when people say Astro, most of the time they mean the framework, the technology, of course, but Astro is also a tech company right now, and for me that's also a huge factor when you're deciding on what you take as your framework, because if you know that it's well supported, then you will have more confidence in that. And Astro as a company, they have the maintainers as a full-time employees, so that's great. There's Astro the technology, and there's Astro the company. And another reason I chose this picture is because when the Primogen took this screenshot, I was there. Fred just retweeted me last year when I tweeted about one of the things I've been doing, and I thought, well, that's a nice transition, because I also need to introduce myself. Um, so yeah, I'm Ayo. I'm currently a front end consultant. So that's kind of the background I'm coming from. So I'm presenting the framework here as not as part of the Astro team, but as someone who consults with different organizations, talks to them about tools they can use. So yeah, my main website is Ayco.io, this one. So if you're curious, you want to know more about me for some reason, it's all there. But two bits of what I recently did that's related to Astro. There's a GitHub project that have some contributors, attracted some people who are also interested in Astro, where we basically do exploration on what you can do with Astro components. And I'm really a huge fan of just the simplicity of Astro components. And we ask questions in this project, and basically we ask, how can we do this, what's the best approach? And yeah, it's fun. It's fun. So the later thing that I did just last month, I released this application, which is basically an alternative to Pocket.com. I'm I use that a lot, but recently it has not been working for me. So I figured maybe I can create an alternative, and in that same effort, I will also have a good demo of what Astro can do in terms of progressively enhancing the experience there. So yeah, but yeah, let's just get right into the framework of the night, the topic. So as I said, this is an introduction geared towards anyone who are just exploring Astro. If you're wondering if you can use Astro for your use case, then yeah, we're gonna answer that here. So this is the simple outline of what I'm going to go through. I'm gonna take you through a short walk down memory lane. I think to fully appreciate this new frameworks, we need to understand where we've been in the past decade of web development. Um, yeah, just to be on the same page on why we need this new approaches. Then, of course, the meat of the talk, we're going to go through the features of Astro, what sets it apart from the other frameworks out there. And then in the end, we're going to wrap it up very nicely so you can go back home to your friends, to your bosses, and hopefully you have a familiarity with the tool, add it to your tool belt, and say, well, that's a good use case for Astro, we can use Astro for that. Yeah. So yeah, short walk down memory lane. So maybe a decade or so ago, 11 years ago, front end development wasn't really a thing, right? So back end and front end weren't very separate back then, and we called this when front end development came to be, we called it the decoupled architecture. I don't know how often you still hear that, but back end, front end, that's the decoupled architecture. Because previously, they were all together and we did a lot of the business logic on the server. So this pre-rendering the UI, fetching data, doing computations on the server, that was the norm back then. But it was very difficult to maintain for us. Like if maybe you can imagine if there's a spike in the traffic and everything happens on the server, all the users can feel that. Basically there's going to be a downtime there, or possibly uh yeah, crashing the website, because we didn't have Netlify, we didn't have Vercel, and we did a lot of upscaling and managing the load manually back then. And now I can still remember the first time I heard this from a friend. We were planning a project for a client, and he mentioned, let's do all the logic on the browser. And the first time I heard that, it, it was almost crazy, because I don't think JavaScript was ready that time. We didn't have the tools we have right now. So it was the very, very edge of the front end development. So this being just an introduction talk, I can't really go deep into the history of it. But fast forward to now, this is what we get. This is a bundle of an application that I generated with Angular. The first time I showed this in this same talk, a person approached me at the end and said, "Ayo, you should have used Next.js, because the bundle they need to just have a hello world application is crazy." And yeah, I agree. I'm sorry I did not update the slides, but the idea still stands. If you use a typical web JavaScript framework, you're gonna be taking in a lot of JavaScript, and that's because there's gonna be one single index page there. There's gonna be one root div, and that's one entry point to the application. And JavaScript needs to figure out which parts to build, needs to keep track of which parts should react when state change. All of these things JavaScript need to do. So in the end, we just use JavaScript. We experience problems with JavaScript. We use JavaScript to solve those problems, and so we're kind of building up, and now we're in this uh, situation where it's all a big pile of JavaScript. So a typical web app using a JS framework like Angular or React will look something like this. And I have to shout out Elian, because I grabbed this visual from him when he did his introduction talk here in Amsterdam. So the typical web app would need JavaScript in each and every part, basically because JavaScript does everything. So even if you know that the footer is just a static text, you still need JavaScript for that. So we end up with this list of web framework problems that I would love to talk about, but we don't have that kind of time. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of articles out there that would help define these things, but basically because of all this JavaScript maintaining all of the parts of your application, we end up with this 4 basic problems. I kind of sneaked in the 4th one in there. No, it's not commonly talked about online, but you'll appreciate Astro more just because of this fourth framework lock-in problem. And now, Astro, when we got Astro, it's a breath of fresh air, I would say, because it's sort of just laying back there, not joining the framework wars, so to speak. And now people just feel like it's the framework friend, and I would agree with that. So one important principle when you're working with Astro is what we call islands architecture. You'll hear that a lot when you're working with Astro. Although I would also mention that there are frameworks out there that are also bringing in this islands architecture, 11T and Marco.js. Although I have not had the chance to assess those yet. Astro. So this is just in contrast to the previous visual we have here, where you need JS in every part. Basically, if you have an islands architecture implementation, you know exactly which parts doesn't need JS. You know exactly which parts are just, HTML or text, and which parts are interactive. So those small parts are the islands of interactivity, we would call. And they're called islands because just imagine they're in an ocean of static content. So islands of interactivity in an ocean of static content. And with Astro, we are actually given this capability to write the interactive parts. Again, this is from Elian. We're given this opportunity to write the interactive parts in the different kind of frameworks. So that's why it's the framework friend, I would say. But this is kind of an extreme example right here because when you do, I don't know if someone would actually do this in a production application. But yeah, I'm just throwing this here because it's possible. It's the extreme example. This is more realistic. You know which parts are static, you know which parts are requiring JS there. And Astro is giving you the capability to control where and when you can load the JavaScript. Another thing, you're not alone. You will feel this when you use Astro. You're not alone basically because there's a lot of integrations, community-driven packages out there. You can just go to their website, astro.build/integrations. Look up what you need. There's pretty much basically everything you need right now. I think that's safe to say. So just search there, and you'll basically find what you are looking for. Easy developer experience. That just needs to be said when you're talking about Astro. Type safety for content. It's one unique thing. Ben Holmes mentioned it. That's the content collections API. It's really great when you want to define the required properties in your front matter. So that's really great. And there's Houston. You'll see him everywhere. Cute guy. He's in VS Code. They also have an experimental Houston AI, which I have to say, I guess because someone will call me out if I don't say this. Don't take the AI as the source of truth. Basically, if you're just looking it up, you need the quick links to the relevant documents. Use it. I used it when preparing for this talk. Right. How do we create an application? Yeah, we saw this earlier, so we can just zoom through this demo. You call create Astro latest. You'll meet Houston for the first time. You can name your project. You can select the template. I usually select empty when I just really need to experiment something, but it's recommended to use the sample files if you're learning it for the first time. You definitely should install the dependencies. I choose no here because it will take time. Yeah, choose the how strict you want TypeScript to be, and there you go. You have an Astro app already, an Astro project. And the code base will be familiar if you worked with anything that has a directory driven route system kind of thing. So there's special directory for the routes. That's the pages. Those are gonna be your pages, and you can sort of organize your components and layouts in the way you like. Yeah, and we're interested to show this is kind of how you opt in to the complexity. One thing you can do is if you don't know what to run, you can just run Astro Ad. It will give you a list of what's available there. If you don't find anything you like, just go to the integrations page. So we would like to add React. This is the typical demo right here, which, yeah, we can just go to the demo now. So Ben Holmes showed us earlier the client directives, which is very important when you're that's when you're trying to tell Astro where to load JS, when to load JS. And this is just the generated index page we have here. If you wanna create a React component, you can just do that as you would normally do. SX, I would just copy paste this one. I already wrote it. I cheated a bit. So now we have the counter React component. And we could insert that here, maybe in the footer counter. There you go. So yeah, the experience here when you're doing that sometimes is a hit and miss. Sometimes it would VS Code can figure out the component you're trying to import. Sometimes you have to import it yourself. But basically, the front matter exists there for all your imports, for all your server side logic. And now we have the counter component in the footer, and it shows up here. And it's by design that it wouldn't work the first time because we have not told Astro yet that we need JavaScript for this. And at this point, this is still just 0.js. This is just dead HTML without JS. We have the usual, because I'm using the development server, we'll see hot module reload stuff in here. You can see all of this JS are just needed by Vite to help you in the development server. Let's close this. Now we wanna say we need the JavaScript for this to load, to be interactive. When you type client, you'll see you have several options right here. Load is the most eager. It will just download the JavaScript and the framework you need when the page loads. So now you see we have more stuff. We have the component itself, and then you also have the framework. You need to download the framework for the browser to understand what to do with your component. And now that's interactive basically. And to make it more interesting, we can push it out more. I guess it's already out of the view. I usually need to push it out, but there's another client directive here that you can use to only load JavaScript when the component is visible. And that makes sense because when you have a web page, the users cannot really interact yet to the components that they cannot see. So client visible is very, very useful for that. So we start with just the normal 0.js situation. When we scroll this slowly, then we see it gets downloaded when the component is visible and it is interactive. So yeah, that's the usual demo for the client directives. There's more. There's more you can do. You have media to define. This is sort of like the responsive uh, client directive. So you can actually tell Astro to not hydrate a component when in a small screen or in a tablet, basically. So I'd also like to briefly show the project I mentioned earlier. This is just dead HTML 0.js at this point, but it is interactive. I don't need JavaScript here. What it is doing is it can take a URL, go to the server, fetch the article, and give us back just the content. So this is still just 0.js. It's an application that's basically a reader application that I use daily because I want to save the things I read online. And it gets saved here. I'm using uh, client-side routing here, actually. When you click that, it's not actually fetching that again because we cached it in the browser and now it's all there. We can open another one. CNET. Go to the thing and it's all there. I don't need to fetch it again because I already did that. And it's cached on the browser. So that's just one very, very um, practical way of using the server-side rendering and then being able to use Cache API on the browser. Now, uh, this is this is me just being a consultant. Okay, I need to bring up downsides as I see it, just to give the user the people in the wild, so to speak, an idea of what they're opting in when they take the tool. So if you compare Astro with your typical static site generators, for example, Jekyll, or I don't know, I'm using Jekyll still for my blog. I have not rewrote it to Astro. It's because you are taking in more build time here. Uh, but that's because we know Astro is doing way more than just static site generation. Uh, that's just one thing you need to consider. You could fall into number two, false familiarity. It's just the realistic thing that some people will fall into when they use it for the first time. When you're told you can write your components in framework you already know, but it's actually not running in the same way you are used to, you're bound to hit some walls in there. But the good thing here is, as I said, there's great people behind Astro. There's a community out there that's already maybe experienced with what you are trying. So yeah, just consider that. Also, performance. It's just different for every use case out there. I think Astro is the best when it comes to content focused websites. There's no question about that. But you have to also understand for yourself in your use case what are your performance goals and what are the benchmarks you are looking at. And when you see online that people are comparing frameworks, this are the microseconds differences, you need to understand that it's going to be different for your use case. But just to give you an idea of what really people are feeling about Astro right now, here's a conversation over at Twitter. Obviously, let's not take this as something set in stone, but I'd like to give you a feel of what people are talking about. I think people are just recognizing this innovation in how Astro is doing stuff like pre-rendering on the server and being able to declare when you need JS, where you need JS. It's really amazing. And framework creators, library tooling creators are recognizing that. So let's wrap it up. What is Astro for? Astro is first and foremost for content-rich websites. It's for building fast static sites with interactive islands. Astro is for progressive enhancement with your favorite frameworks. And yeah, that's it. That's it for my introduction talk. Thank you. And these are my sources. Thank you, Elian, for the visuals.
Awesome. Any questions from anybody? If not, I'll add one. I like when it comes to learning and getting into Astro. What did you find like, especially like you mentioned other sort of static site generators and other frameworks that you've used? What did you find like as one of the things that could make somebody a little bit sort of like stuck on it or need some sort of like help and guidance about it? Is there something that you found that you weren't expecting?
Yeah. So when you're working with Astro, you're basically working like a full stack here. You have code that will run in the server for pre-renderings or just rendering the UI stuff, and that's actually powerful. But if you're just coming in with maybe just a front end background and you're used to have expectations that things run in the browser, I think that's very common. So just be aware that there's code running on the server and code that will run in the client. That's kind of the new paradigm here. But what I like about Astro, I would say, is that compared to other frameworks that are doing this thing, it's very clear with Astro, like what's running in the server, what's running in the client, and that's why I'm more confident in using Astro when I need that kind of use case. It's very clear, like which parts will run in the client and which parts will run in the server, and other frameworks just like to blur that out. I don't know. I'm not confident with that. So that's it.
Thank you. Great. So I think that's it with the questions. And then thank you, Ayo. So next up is Richard. So just let us know when you're ready. Classic thing on mute.
Yep, unmuted my mic, didn't unmute on Teams. Classic. I'm just going to share my screen. I have been having all of the internet problems tonight, so I'm fingers crossed it stays together for the next like 20 minutes or however long. But we'll see. Can everybody see this presentation screen? Cool, perfect. So, getting started with Astro and Kontent.ai. Quick intro on me. I'm a principal front-end developer at Dept. I've been working in web agencies, web development for about 12 years. I hate this photo, but it's the only one I've got of me that isn't drunk, more or less, so I just have to use it. We are hiring at the moment, so if you're interested in a new role, feel free to follow the QR code or the tiny URL there. We've got plenty of roles up, and we've got a few more going up this week as well. But with that out of the way, I'm just going to get straight into the code. So what I'm going to run through today is just quickly how to set up Astro and a headless CMS, in this case, Kontent.ai. And the first thing I'm just going to quickly cover off is I've already set up an Astro project. We've seen it done twice today, so I didn't think anybody would want to see that again. It's the default options, sample files, TypeScript enabled, so we're good there. And then on the Kontent.ai side, I've created a new blank project. So all you need to do there is register with Kontent.ai with a developer account. You get access to a free account with all the features enabled. Basically ready to go for kind of non-commercial use, so you can trial it out and see how you get on with it. So I've created a new project in here. And the first thing that we need to do is get our content types created. So I'm going to go into our content model option here, and I'm going to introduce you to one of my favorite features out of any headless CMS I've used. And I honestly don't know why more headless CMSs aren't already using this, and that's content type snippets. What these are essentially is like small groups of fields that you can then use to build up your content types. So I'm going to create a new one here called metadata. And then we'll add a text field and call this meta title. You can probably see where I'm going with this. We'll make that required because everyone should have one. And then we'll do the same thing with a meta description. And again, we'll make that required for now. And you could build this out with, open graph tags, Twitter card, whatever else we need to stick in the head of a page these days. And then I'm just going to save this. And that gives us our metadata. And if you click on this little hash icon on the top right, you can see the code name of this as well for future reference. And then I'm just going to go back up and create a new one. We're going to call this base page. And again, going to make sure it's got kind of a page title, so kind of not the metadata title, but what you might show on the actual front end. We'll bring in we'll call it a summary field, so maybe what you'd show on like a card or something like that. And again, make that required. And then we'll just save that for now. And then again, we'll go back up and go back to our content types instead. And then we'll create two of these. The first one will be our homepage. And we can include our content type snippet here. So we're going to drop in our metadata and drop in our base page. And then we've always got to think about our content editors in these situations. So we can make content groups up here as well. So I tend to like a general group, and then I like to put the metadata out of view because it's not always being worked on, and it just helps us kind of keep things more organized. And then we can just, I think, tick that box, and then move that into the metadata field there as well. And I can save that. And then that's our homepage done. And what I want to do as well is just create a new one again, and then we'll just make like an article content group. And we'll do the same thing here, general metadata. This bit's optional, you wouldn't need to do this if you didn't want to. And then we can do the same thing here. And then lastly, for an article, I'm just going to save this for now. For an article, this isn't necessarily going to be accessible at a single page, so you want to add a URL slug. And I'll just call this slug for now. Again, a required field. And then we can choose a field we want to auto-generate this from. I'm just going to choose the page title. We save that. And now we've got a home and an article. And if we go to our content and assets, this is the side that a content editor would normally see. So we can come in here and create a new content item. Select our type. So we'll create a home page. And I'm going to be super original and just populate this with some really boring placeholder content. And then we can go in here and we need to go and change workflow step. And then we want to publish this piece of content. So we created a homepage. And again, we can go back up to the top level. And then we'll just create a couple of example articles. Drop this in there. And again, as soon as we fill this field out, you can see the slug field has also been auto-filled for us. And then we'll call this article 1, not 12. I can count. Create our article there. And then again, publish this. And then just to save time, if I remember correctly, I thought I could duplicate from there, but I can't. I'll just create another one from scratch. So just wanting to populate a little bit of content here. So we've got some content to play with when we are setting pages up in Astro. Cool. So I think I did that relatively quickly, so hopefully we didn't lose anybody along there. So we've now got 3 pages, our home page and 2 articles. And you can see in here for our articles, we've got a slug of article 1 and a slug of article 2 for the other one as well. So now, the second feature of Kontent.ai that I really, really like is the model builder. And to use that, if we go to our environment settings, we're going to need two pieces of information. So the first thing is our environment ID. So this is a unique identifier for this project. More specifically, it's environment. So you can have multiple environments. You could have a production, a UAT, sandbox, whichever environments make sense for your particular use case. So we want to grab our environment ID. And then we also want to go into our API keys, scroll down, and we need a management API key. So we tick this box to enable the API, and then we create a new key, and then we can copy this as well. And then what we can do next is use the Kontent.ai model generator, CLI tool. So I'm just going to drop a command in here. Don't worry about seeing the API key. I'm going to delete it in a minute anyway. So I'm using PMPM in this case, but you could use NPX. You could use Yarn's version as well. So we're just going to run at Kontent.ai -AI/model-generator. Then we set in our output directory to be the models folder inside our source directory. And then we pass in our environment ID here, and then our API key that we've just created as well. I'm just going to run this. Hopefully, the joys of live coding will work. So we're just going to install the global dependency, and we've run through, and you can see it's generated a whole bunch of files for us. So if we take a look at our directory here, and go into our source, the models folder, and we've got content type snippets. So we can see we've got our base page content type snippet and our metadata content type snippet, and then we've got our article and home as well. So this is brilliant for developers who enjoy working with TypeScript. This is kind of full type generation for our types. So we've got our base page content snippet here. And you can see we've got our summary field and our title field that have been generated by that. And then we've also got our, so if we've gone to our article here, you can see in here, this only has one field generated on the actual article type itself, which is the slug, which we added to that particular content model. But we could also combining it with our two content type snippet types as well. So it intelligently builds up our models based on the content type snippets that we've also created, which isn't something I usually see headless CMS's kind of type builders do. They're often a little bit less intelligent and just kind of generate a type for a particular content model, but then duplicate all the fields across anything that's shared. So I just really like the fact that it does use TypeScript's features to combine these types together and just give you one type that you can then use at the end. So we've now got our content types in there. We'll now want to just generate some page using these as well. So we're going to need our environment ID again, and we need to expose this to Astro. So Astro uses a .env file, and we obviously need to make sure that isn't committed to source control. And it is excluded by default in the default Astro install, so good practice there. We're adding in our content environment ID environment variable here, and then this is just hidden by VS Code, but we've got our environment variable in there as well. And then in case anyone's kind of relatively new to using V, you can also add TypeScript type safety to this. So in your env.d.ts file, you can add in the import meta env and import meta interfaces, and then you can include additional environment variable values in here as well. Another way of just making sure that everything is nice and type safe. And at that point, we're now ready to actually use the Kontent.ai delivery SDK. So we're just going to need to install that first. So I'll just hide the directory again. So we're going to run our, I'm still getting used to this keyboard. So we're going to run our pnpm add Kontent.ai/delivery SDK. And this will include the in order to actually use the content delivery SDK and their API. So next up, we want to go into our pages, and we've got our index.astro page here, and we're just going to grab our client. So we want to do create delivery client, and I don't know why this happens, but TypeScript doesn't always update when I install a new package. So I'm just going to create a TypeScript file. I'm not too sure why this happens. I don't know if it's a VS Code issue on my side or if it's a TypeScript issue, but it does like to happen from time to time. So I'll create a home.ts file and service for now. And this hopefully will have intelligence now. Perfect. So I'm going to export a function in here called fetch home. We won't need any parameters for this. We're going to create our client. And in here, we're going to pass in our environment ID. And again, for anyone not too familiar with Astro or Vite, it allows to access environment variables in this case, rather than using, everyone's probably used to process.env to get to these values, but you actually want to do import.meta.env. And then because we updated our env file earlier, we've got our environment variable already exposed here. And then we can use the client to get some data from our CMS. So we can do client.item, pass in our code name of home, and then to promise, and of course, we need to await this because it's an asynchronous function. Let's make sure our function's async as well. And then we can return our result.data. So this is great, but at the moment, this is not strongly typed. We don't actually know what this is. So we know we've got an item, but we don't really know anything about it. Elements isn't giving us any results when we actually check that. To fix this, we've already generated our models. So we can just go in and just add the type here, make sure we import that. And then now if we go to item.elements, you can see we have all of our fields available. So now we've got our fetch home function. We want to go back into our index.astro file. And in here, again, it was alluded to earlier, the clear difference between client-side and server-side logic. So anything that happens in the front matter of our Astro file is going to happen on the server. So we can come in here and fetch our home data. So actually, I'll just do item home, and then we can do fetch home. Did I export that? I did. TypeScript does not want to update here. To do this manually. Let's go into service home and fetch home. And call that. And again, we want to await that because it's asynchronous. And then now we have access to our home value. And at this point, we could come in here, update our H1 to be elements. And when you're using content type snippets, it prefixes the name of the field with that snippet, so you don't have the risk of field name collisions, which again, another nice thing that's just taken care of for you. So we can pass the title in there. And if we switch to our Astro in here, we get an error. Lovely. What did I miss in here? The joys of live coding. I'm just going to restart Astro just in case. No, that's brilliant. Let's see, what have I missed? Don't know if anyone else can spot anything there. Interesting. This looks okay to me. I'm not sure if anybody else can spot anything that a mistake I might have made there. Yeah, I tried to reassign the dev server. Normally that does fix it if there's ever anything weird like this, but I'm not too sure. Let me just try and remove this just in case. There's definitely something I've done. I'm also not liking the fact that the TypeScript IntelliSense isn't picking up there, but let's just try this. I knew I should just create some slides earlier. Okay, so that's fine. Oh, I've realized why. This trips me up all the time. I have to do .value at the end. I don't know why the error there isn't more useful. That is a shame because yeah, that's essentially why. It's because I was trying to render an object instead of a value, sorry, a string there. So if we do .value at the end, we then output in the actual name of the field. Crisis averted, we fixed it. So that's perfect. So now we're pulling content out of our headless CMS. We're doing it on the server side. No issues with any JavaScript getting added to the bundle on the client side. And we're also not exposing any values, any secrets or anything like that to the client side either. And the one other thing I want to show you as well is if we go in and create a new file for our articles, we can use, again, similar syntax to what we used to with things like Next.js and so on. We use the square brackets around our parameters, so we can include our slug value in there. I'm just going to copy the contents of our index file just to save a bit of time on there. And what we want to do in here is fix our imports because we're at an extra level. And we're going to create a article.ts file. And we'll grab our fetch code as well. And we're going to change this to fetch articles. We're going to use the same client. You'd probably abstract the client creation away as well if you want to be more organized than this. And we can use that article type here. And in this case, we actually want to get all of the items. So we're going to change item to items, remove the coordinate from here. And then this is going to give us an object which includes an items object instead with our full set of articles that is retrieved. Now we can go into our slug and then we can do, again, something similar to Next.js here. And we can export our get static props function. Oh, sorry, get static paths. I'm still getting that mixed up even now. I do wonder why. I'm just going to quickly go into here and just restart the TypeScript server because half the time that fixes any TypeScript errors that I think anyone ever has. So, apart from when you're doing a screen share, it's the only time. Although that might have just been a syntax error on my part there. I'm going to fetch our items from get articles. Or fetch articles, sorry. Did I change the function name? Yep. Again, just doesn't want to update our can drop this as well. So we're just going to use our fetch articles function. We're getting our items out of there. We should be anyway, assuming that's coming through properly. And then in here, we want to return items.map. Let me just double check. I've definitely. There is an items object on there. Hold on a second. Again, I'm just tripping myself up with syntax errors here. There we go. Now we're happy. Oh, we should be, hopefully. Oh, wait, that would help. So we're getting there in the end. There we go. We've got an array of articles now. So we can do items.map. And then we can do item. And again, similar to Next.js, it's got a similar structure. We've got a params object in here, and we just want to match these up with the parameters that we're passing in our file name here. So we've got a slug parameter, so that would be item.elements slug and then value. And then we could do one of two things in here. We could use Astro's props to params to pull out the slug parameter from the URL and then manually fetch the data. But in this case, since we've already got our items, we can actually just generate the props here and just pass that through. So we could pass in, so just say like an article property and just pass the entire item through that way. And this will give us an item, an article prop that we can then use. So we'd be able to do astro.props.article. But the problem here is we don't have any IntelliSense on our article property there. So Astro lets you instead define a props type. And in this case, we could do article and then specify this as an article type. Should be able to do that. It needs to be exported. Oh, sorry, wrong bracket type there. There we go. I think it should work. It's just TypeScript not wanting to pick that up for some reason. So we're going to go into our models and our content types, and then we can do article. There we go. Now we've got our article property defined, and that carries through to our astro.props. It's now picking that up. So again, at this point, we could go through in here and say astro.props.article elements, and then we can do our title. And if we were to go to slash articles slash article 1, all being well, that's not coming through for some reason. Why have we not got that data? I think I might retire from doing live coding in the future. Well, let's just quickly do some debugging. So results.data.items. Let's make sure we've actually got something coming out. Results not defined. That's a me problem. Okay, so we've got data. We've got a slug. Okay, we've got a value there, so I'm not too sure why that's not wanting to come through. Let's see. Okay, I'm not too sure why this isn't picking up here. This is a bit strange. They have items.elements.slug.value. That should, I believe that should be working. I'm not too sure why it's not. In the interest of time, it might be easier to just pretend it was working and just move on with that one. I do have a version of this code, more or less, that's already working. So I might just quickly switch over to that just to make sure, because I don't want to waste everybody's time trying to debug a problem that we could just simply avoid. Just 1 second. Just make sure I open this code up. Cool. So let me just quickly stop the dev server in there, switch over to this one, and we'll just do npm dev. I apologize for this sometimes. Oh, of course, this one isn't working. Well, I think that's just because I haven't installed the dependencies for this. Joys. I'm not too sure why that one's not working. Apologies for this. Yeah, I'm not too sure why this isn't working. So the interest of time, Ilesh, it might be easier to just move on to the next talk, because I don't want to run through everything. And at this point, I've covered most of what we were going to cover, what I was going to cover anyway, which is mainly just, this is a me problem. This isn't an Astro problem or a content AI problem. This is we've all been there as a developer problem. So yeah, there's something definitely not quite matching up there. I would be able to spend some time figuring it out, but I don't think anybody wants to watch me just debug some JSON and figure out why I'm getting the wrong data there. But again, when it comes to content AI, I think one of the nicest things here is that you've got the type generation, you've got the content type snippets, which is a great feature from a developer point of view. So the number of times I've had to create, 20 different content types with maybe 60-70% of the fields shared across all of those different content types. This just lets you just roll those out one after the other really, really quickly. And then just focus on the differences between those. And then it kind of follows through into the type generation for you as well. Ooh, actually, you know what? I've just realized what the mistake I've made. This is brilliant. Of course it is. There's a type parameter in here. We're actually pulling out the homepage, which doesn't have a slug. That's why. I'm pretty sure that's why. Let's see. Yeah, so in our query here, we were specifying a type. We weren't actually filtering out down to our article only. So we're pulling out a homepage there instead. And then now if we go down into here, this is just the .value missing again, which is the same mistake I made earlier. And there we go. It works. First try. No issues at all. We got there in the end. Yeah, that's just a me problem. This is why you do exactly what was done earlier, and make sure you have a copy of a code snippet to just bring in instead of doing it live, because this is what you get. But we got there in the end. So yeah, like I said, Kontent.ai, great CMS, Astro, great framework to work with. But just make sure you actually check your code first and make sure it's actually been done correctly. It does help. That's me, Ilesh. Hopefully that's helped introduce people to the wonderful world of Kontent.ai and Astro, and some of the mistakes to not make along the way.
That's awesome. No, it's good to kind of actually talk through the journey. We've all been sort of like hit by the demo gods. It always happens to everyone, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Great to kind of see that. Do you have any questions for Richard? There's one in the chat from, does Astro have like a browser dev tools for debugging?
You can run it if we open up the package.json file. I think it might be a parameter you can specify on the dev command, but you can essentially hook it up to the usual kind of node debugger in Chrome and just debug it through there. So you can debug the server side that way. Other than that, you can obviously use the dev tools as normal if you're debugging client side code.
Great, thank you. I think, yeah, just one. So obviously feedback on the CMS side of things, obviously hit Kontent.ai up if you are looking to look at the CMS. But thank you, Richard. So next up, and finally, we've got Elian on our next session. So just let us know when you're ready and we can go from there.
Yep, I'm sharing my screen. Can you all hear me okay? I have the chat open, by the way, so you can type in chat while I go. No worries there. Awesome, thank you. Opening all my windows. All right, let's hope that the god of the live demos has a little bit of mercy on me. All right, so welcome to my talk, sharing state in between components and frameworks. I'm Elian, I'm a maintainer of Astro, specifically working in the developer experience area, where we take care of documentation, developer experience, and community, and overall other things. I'm also a software engineer at VBridge here in Belgium, where I'm located. If you want to follow me online, I'm at Elian Codes on most platforms. And otherwise, you can also go to my website and find my socials from there. Obviously, by now, you have a pretty good understanding, especially after Richard's talk, you know how to debug Astro. But since you know what Astro is, I'm totally going to ignore what Astro is and just dive into our topic, which is, of course, sharing state in between components and frameworks itself inside of Astro. One thing we have to understand, and we saw that in Ayo's talk, is Islands architecture. Some of these slides might be a little bit familiar because he used the same ones. That's from my talk in Amsterdam. It's also up on YouTube where I dive a little deeper in the overall Islands architecture of Astro. So what is the Islands architecture? I'm going to do a brief reminder for you all, which is, if we take a look at this UI, we can basically represent a UI like this. Every block is a separate component and has no idea of actually the existence of other components in our UI, therefore islands. If we take a look or compare it to a more traditional web app like Next.js, for instance, we see that all of our components are wrapped inside of a bigger root component. And in most cases, that root component will actually contain a lot of JavaScript. Here, the components will know about the existence of other components inside of the UI, and they are able to exchange data, for instance, being it props or a state. In Astro, it's only HTML and CSS by default, so that's Ben's talk. It's opt-in by design, so not opt-out. So we are opting in to JavaScript. Every component by default is isolated and hasn't state by default. So this instantly makes things a little bit more complicated, especially if we start looking at complex UI in Astro. Especially if we start looking at partial hydration. By now you know what that is, that's shipping the JavaScript. Astro is, of course, UI agnostic, meaning you can mix and match different frameworks on the same page. It might be actually a bad idea, but I'm just showing off here what's capable, what Astro is capable of. But even if every component is written in a different language, in a different flavor of JavaScript, they all are still compiled down by default to HTML and CSS, unless, of course, partial hydration. Now, let's imagine that we don't really care about anything performance-wise, and this is our UI. How do we exchange information in between the components? Well, in between components in the same language, it's quite easy. Of course, we have here an index page, and we have a header.view component and content.svelte component. And that content.svelte component has a lot of other Svelte components inside of it. Of course, that whole Svelte component has its own state. We can interact in between both, all of those components without losing anything. But the header will never know what the content is doing, or the content will never know what the header state is doing. We can use props, which travel down the component tree. For instance, we can go from index to header and to content, but we can never go up the component tree. But what if we have a web shop? What if we want to update our shopping cart indicator from, for instance, 2 to 4? When we add a new product? Well, of course, we don't want to hydrate our whole website just to pass some number or update a cart component. This is where state comes in. So state in Astro, we have NanoStores. NanoStores is an independent open source state manager project. It's very lightweight. If I recall correctly, it's around 313 bytes big, or even small. It offers complete TypeScript safety and is next to that completely framework agnostic. So you can use it in any framework you like. I don't want to talk too much today, so let's just hope I can give my demo. I'm going to just hop into a terminal here. Let's hope everything goes right. So let's just create a new Astro project. You can obviously see our awesome DX here. Let's wait for Houston. There he is. Let's build a new project. I'm just going to call it sharing state. I'm going to use an empty project since I'm going to go along while we go. If you have questions, by the way, while I go, feel free to put them in the chat. Installing dependencies can take a while. Why is it called Houston? Well, Astro is Astro, so we're in the space theme. So that's why it's called Houston. Installing dependencies while being on a call is always a little bit tricky. I actually think there is a preferred offline flag, but we're here for now, so just let's go ahead. All right, sharing state. So now we have our sharing state project. Let's just also start our dev server. I'm gonna open up a new terminal as well, since we probably will need that anyways. We have our index file. If I now go to our local host, we see Astro, which is exactly what we have on the page here. Gonna open up the terminal again. We want to do some languages, some UI languages. Let's just add, what language do we want? I think I'm going to do it in Solid. Let's do Vue, let's do Svelte. Maybe let's add a little bit of Tailwind as well. You can do that all in one go. Awesome developer experience. In the case of Svelte and Tailwind, it's a little bit more complicated because they both need a config file. But if everything goes right, and I hope it will, it should just create those automatically. And while I'll do that, I'll also create a new folder called components, because we're obviously going to need some components, and we'll probably need. I'm gonna build a counter. Okay, yeah, there we go. Counter Svelte component. I know what that is. That's just the Tailwind stuff doing difficult. Let's add a counter in Solid, and let's add a counter in Vue. Okay, so this works, installing the dependencies as well. While that's installing, I'll just build a simple counter component in Vue. If you're not familiar with Vue, it's quite easy to read, so I'll hope you understand this. Let's just build a template. Let's wrap it in a div so we can later add styles, which has the count, a button to increment the count. Awesome. Then I want also a button to decrement the count. Okay, that should work. And then, of course, we want some reactives, which is a ref. It's called a ref in Vue. There we go. And then we want to do a count, which is initial state of 0. Quite easy. Gonna check on the dependencies. They're still installing. Okay, fine. Let's build one in Solid as well. So we need to create a signal. Then let's do preferred const. So let's just build. I'm gonna call it counter Solid just to make it clear that it's written in Solid, which actually returns kind of the same, just a wrapping div. A div with counter. How did I call it? I'm just going to copy this just to make it a little bit easier. Of course, we have to change all of this. So what do we need in Solid? We need to have a create signal of count, which has an initial state of 0. Then we want to delete all of this. I'm going a little bit too fast here. Okay, so we need a on click. It's written like this, I guess, in Solid. And then we have to do it some way like this, where we go like this, and then we want to set the count to the count. Don't forget brackets -1. Oh, it's an increment. So it should be like this. All right. Now we can do exactly the same for our decrement. Awesome. I'm going to create the index files, the config files, just to get us started there. All right. Now I have both counter components set up, one in Vue and one in Solid. Now I, of course, want to display on the page, because right now the page is still just empty. How many frameworks can you add to a single CLI? You can, I think, add all of them if it's just frameworks. I know that it sometimes has a little bit of difficulties when you use Svelte and Tailwind, because they both require config files. So let's import our counter components. Let's call it counter Vue. So it's easy readable that it's Vue. And then let's import not the Svelte one, but the one from Solid, which doesn't need any extension. I'm going to wrap them in a div, and then counter Vue, counter Solid. If I go to the page now, counter Vue, Probably need to restart the server. So the demo gods are not watching. Uh-oh. I probably did something wrong. Gonna take a look. I had this actually earlier, so I. What could it be? Invalid JS syntax. Well, this should be good, but in any case, that's why you always have a backup. I have my counters here. There should be kind of the same. Oh, I do know what's going on here. Yep. I didn't import them in my Astro. So import, I guess it's called view. Normally this should actually go automatic. And then we just can do it like view. How do I do this again? Extensions, integrations, I'm sorry, integrations. Integrations view. That should work. Okay, now I see the restart. I'm gonna hide this for now, gonna hide this for now. And if everything goes according to plan, if I start the dev server, yeah, this is actually what it was supposed to do. It didn't do it, but fine. Let's start it again. Oh, right, there we go. So now we have the view counter on the page. And if we import solid, so import solid.js from solid, is it solid or solid.js? This we'll see in a moment. And if we go now, we have to restart the server again. Cannot find module, which is probably because it's solid.js. Starting the server. Something's going wrong. Solid.js with a capital J, of course, typos. Okay, let's see if this works. It didn't. I'm just going to add them again, probably. It will work now. I have actually no idea what I did wrong. Oh, solid.js had a hyphen in between. Why is it always so difficult doing live coding? And you would think that by now, that after giving all these talks, that it would actually go a little bit easier. It never goes that easy. Yep, now it works. So now if I reload the page, counter is solid is undefined. That makes sense because I didn't export it. Export default counter is solid. There we go. Okay, so now we have kind of our page. If we click on increment and decrement, you see nothing works. That's because we didn't hydrate that page. So if we now hydrate our both components, find load. I'm not really caring about performance. Normally, I would use something like client visible or client idle. But this should just work for now. Now we can see that both have a state. So actually, the counter is increasing here, and the counter is decreasing or increasing here. Now comes the big thing. What about state? What if you want to share our state in between both components because we want to share everything? Well, of course, it is possible. So I'm going to take CLI again. I'm going to clear this. Yep. And then add nano stores in solid and view. That might take a little while. And while that's installing, I'll add a new folder called stores. And I'll add a file called something like counter store, just a TypeScript file. Okay, packages are installing. I'm just going to import an atom from nano stores. It's actually very easy. You can really compare it to something like Vue. So now, if I take the initial state as a 10, I can go back to my counter component, delete our initial state here, just import our use store from our nano stores / view. Then I'll also import the count. How did I call it again in the counter store? Counter. So if I now import counter from stores counter store and then say const count equals use store counter, I'll have to use it like this, counter.set, because we have a setter and a getter, which looks a little bit like we do with signals. Then I can say count +1 and count -1. Yep, that's not a problem. That's just because Volar server still has to catch up. Yes, that should work. So if I now restart Vue server, that works. Okay. Now we can see that it works. So we have 10, which was the initial state. If I go up, if I go down, that works. We actually have to do it like this. Now we want to do the same in another framework, completely different framework, nothing in common. We're going to import our store again from, this time we need our nano stores from solid, and we need to import our counter from the actual store file, which is counter stores, counter store. That should work. And if we now do const counter, we should see that it's 10. Now increment and decrement, that works as well. If we now use these buttons, they don't work because we don't have used our getters and setter from the store. Now I'm not going to do that because the process is exactly the same. There is one little thing I wanted to show, which is doing the same in Svelte, because Svelte is kind of a special one because they have the dollar operator. And you can just do an import of your counter here, and then you can just add your div. And I'm just going to do this. Will that work? No, that won't work. Just import our counter like this and like this. This is minus. And we prefix them with each with a $sign. And now, if I import our counter Svelte and I put it on the page, Svelte, I'm going to also hydrate it. If everything went right, that should work. Let's also import it, of course. Import it here. If everything's going right, we can now see it here. And if we do plus and minus, it works. So now we're sharing state in between all of those components. All right, I'm not going to take too long anymore. Went a little bit over time. Basically, Astro wouldn't be Astro if we hadn't documented this. So it's completely out there. If you want to read this recipe, this is a completely recipe for you to read, written by one of our community members called Otherlord. He's also here in the chat. But to make it a little bit easier for you, we also just have a quick starter template, so you don't have to install all the packages by yourself. So it was inspired on this recipe. Recipes is a concept where we try to solve every specific problem. inside of Astro, and most of these are actually written by members of our community. So if you have an idea for a recipe, feel free to hit me up or just open a PR in the Astro docs. Every idea is more than welcome. And of course, I put some links up here to get you started with Astro. You can check the tutorial over there if you never worked with Astro, if you want to read the recipes over there. There is also a link to the Astro Discord. It's a very welcoming place with more than enough people willing to help you out or to support you on your Astro journey. So be sure to take a look there. So yeah, thanks everyone. That concludes my talk. And I'll publish the slides, and I have an example repo. So yeah, I'll share those later on. Yeah, I think that's it. Thanks everyone.
That's brilliant. Really good talk. I don't think we've got any questions because you've been answering them in the way, which is great. And the demigods stayed with you as well, which is nice. And they allowed it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think like they're really good. Any questions for Elian? No. No.
I see Ayo in the chat saying island bridges. I always played with the idea of calling them boats, which is a little bit funnier. But I'm not like in charge of that, sadly enough.
I think he's typing again. So I think that's it, really. Just want to really thank everyone who attended, all the speakers, really good talks, and I just really want to say thanks and have a nice day and rest of the day that you have, wherever you are. But thank you. Thanks for joining, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.